Good afternoon. This is the second part of my lecture. It's Forms Follow Systems from Medium to Large. This is about scaling up, making a bigger impact from where we were in the last 20-25 years. I ask myself now whether I am still an architect or an advocate. But I think the answer would be 50-50, because I think it's beginning to be very pertinent and important that I advocate as well, since we are in an existential crisis where I think the human species is endangered. In 2016, we put up this book, Garden City, Mega City, Rethinking Cities for the Age of Global Warming. We knew it was coming, and that all the turn of century architecture, sort of all about forms, shapes. It's kind of not heading in the right direction. We persisted in the way we were thinking from when we graduated and started practice, being responsible architects, doing architecture with sustainability. And we were sort of misunderstood quite a bit as to why we put why do we build plants on our buildings? And I think it's important that we now acknowledge that humans is part of nature. We do need to coexist with nature to survive as a human species. So this book was instrumental in us rethinking and putting down into paper, into a book, almost as a textbook for students, people who are interested and decision makers, about how we can actually see design and form making informed by systems. So there are 4 chapters in the book. The one highlighted here is called Layering Cities. It's about how we think about cities in terms of various major topics. One of our favorites is multiple ground levels, where we see creating multiple ground levels in a building as something that is a positive thing and that can be replicated, that overcomes density. You can create high density, yet you can create high amenity. I won't go through all of them, but you could actually look up the book and refer to it. Some other interesting ones, which I talked about in an earlier lecture, was about sky villages. And I will talk a little bit more about inverted skyline later in this lecture. Planting cities is fairly straightforward, and this is what we're beginning to be quite acknowledged for, putting plants, trees onto our buildings. We have come up with a vocabulary of how you can do planting in buildings and how you can integrate it. We have screen of greens, which are vertical planting. Sky gardens, sky parks are really about horizontal urban sort of habitat for plants and nature. And then tropical architecture can be scaled up, where we see it being an infrastructure to support integrated landscaping. Breeding cities is something I talk a little bit more about in the first lecture, is that how we create sort of a breezy and sort of a pleasant microclimates within our buildings. We have quite a bit of this being explained in the first lecture, but I would actually talk about breezeway courtyards later in this lecture. But the last chapter, called Rating Cities, is very important to us. We created 5 ratios. We think these 5 ratios can have catalytic effect on cities if we start measuring this. We are so often, we use ratios like GFA, site coverage, sort of a floor to wall ratio. This indexes are sort of very often used, but they may be a bit more related to real estate, but it doesn't sort of tell you whether or not the building is a good building, is a good city, is a good master plan or not. So we thought about what we can actually come up with that hopefully, developers, cities can actually adopt some of this and kind of create a environment that encourages this, the purpose behind this ratio. I will show you how it has reflected in our buildings, but good news is that such ratios has been taken up by a few cities in the region. In Taiwan, Taichung has taken up and using some of these ratios and has very good impact on their cities. Even Australia, Brisbane is looking at some of these indexes and that they will be hoping to implement some of them to encourage developers to do good buildings. In fact, a lot of developers come to us and because of these ratios, and they want to actually do good. So some of these enlightened developers are sort of, getting onto the bandwagon and wanting to do good for the environment. So just to explain a few of these indexes, the green plot ratio is fairly simple. It's about the amount of landscape surfaces compared to the development site area. Community plot ratio is the community spaces that we allocate within development over the site area. Civic generosity is the more difficult one. It's about how the development encourages and facilitates public life in the city. Ecosystem contribution index is a degree where development supplements the city's ecosystem. And the last one, self-sufficient C index, is a development capacity provides its own energy, food, and water. This one is a very important one in today's climate, where we are going through a pandemic, where we have limited, our sort of supply chains are affected, we can't travel. The topic about whether or not cities, countries to be self-sufficient is something that I think has got heads turning and people discussing about it. So just to recap some of the projects I explained earlier and how they work, how they rate with our own ratings. We did this ratings also to push ourselves that the next project that we do, we must be at least better than the last. We don't quite like to stay put, but we like to always constantly push the agenda and do better. And so this was the basis for us to measure ourselves. So this SOTA, as I mentioned earlier, what is interesting is that the community plot ratio is high because I was saying this was a cheese building. We were creating a lot of volume, a lot of anti-mass building. Or negative mass, basically a lot of voids, and these voids were actually social informers, learning and teaching spaces for the school. And you can see the percentage of it being 220%, 2.2 times over the site area. So Park Royal and Pickering, again, you can see the green plot ratio is very high. That's why it's actually quite a darling of the media for greening, not so much for sustainability, which is intended to be, but just integrated landscaping. There's a lot of greenwashing, and now green design seems to be an ism where it's about how much green you can have in the building. And it's a bit disappointed. I do hope that everyone here in this webinar do understand that green building is about sustainability. It's a holistic, integrated, sustainable strategy that we are sort of driving at. So Skyview in Dawson, you can see even if it's a public housing, we were able to create a fairly high community plot ratio of 140%. And this one pushed the agenda of green plot ratio a lot, where we created 1100% of green replacement. And this has a fairly good impact on how to perceive skyscrapers in a city and how we can actually plan in such a way that we can actually reintroduce and encourage biodiversity in our urban areas. In Kampong Admiralty, it's a sort of integrating quite a few systems. So the scores are fairly general in nature. I will now take you through a series of buildings where to talk about typology and how we can actually scale up some of this typology to precinct scale and then to larger master plans and city scale. And I think this is quite important because I think city planners crunch a lot of numbers. They tend to lack the three-dimensional quality of what buildings, architecture can contribute to the bigger picture, to the city scale. So this is where in one of the chapters in our book is called prototypology, where we see every building of ours as a new prototype. And when scaled up, it has a certain impact in the city. So this is the Singapore Pavilion at the World Expo. It was meant to be open last year, but due to the pandemic, it will be open in October this year, in 1.5 months' time. It's almost finishing. It's quite exciting. The greening is already in place, and it does look quite like this rendering we have. But what was the starting point? The starting point was really about thinking about Dubai and Singapore. We are both man-made ecosystems, but we do learn from nature, sort of biomimicry, how we actually learn from nature to create our own habitats, perhaps. So when I was thinking about Dubai, you know, the Middle Eastern countries, which is basically a semi-desert to a desert area, where are all the landscaping? There must be some form of nature in it. So immediately the idea of an oasis came to mind. An oasis is a sort of a water hole for animals, but it's also where it's a collection of water and also where plants will start to thrive. So we think that if we can actually recreate an oasis in Dubai as the pavilion, we can perhaps start thinking about larger topics like reversing desertification and creating a different city form, another building form for the Middle East countries. One of my criticism about the skyscrapers in the cities in Middle East is that form just doesn't, the typology isn't right for the climate, where you build these vertical skyscrapers, these needles in the sky, which is nothing about exposing your surface areas to the sun and creating a huge energy load on the building. So this is where I think the difference in this small little pavilion is a demonstration that we scale it up. We can create a different typology for building in the desert and the semi-desert areas. So you can see here in this section is it actually has a basement where we have the back of house facilities. The first 3 levels is nothing but a 3-dimensional garden. We had so much, we packed in so much landscaping in here that this building, actually this small little plot, does a lot of ecosystem services. I will show you some data later, and that we can actually see the comparison between this pavilion and a sort of a typical bungalow in Dubai. But yet we actually created usable area on the top level, where it's what we call the sky market, where Singapore communicates with the world. There will be arena, there's area for sort of cocktail parties and also general mingling around. So you will be walking into a 3-dimensional garden. You will wander around into 3 cones, and these 3 cones are sort of a very innovative way in which we wanted to think about integrated landscaping. We have inclined and sort of a natural sloping vertical green. We have green on the ground, but we also now have green on the ceiling. We are defying gravity by creating a 3-dimensional sort of a enclosed ecosystem of landscaping. And this is done through having the entire roof area in solar panels, indirectly creating the food, the sunlight, the energy for the plants through grow lights and using sun pipes. So this experience that you will have of this small little oasis starts when you sort of meander around the tree cones and then takes you onto a canopy walk that will bring you around the cones into 3 different exhibits: a rainforest exhibit, then a city cone where we highlight some of the amazing things that we do in Singapore, and then a flower cone where we actually highlight the beauty of Singapore orchids. So this is the canopy walk. So you'll be able to see landscaping engulfing you from the sides, from the bottom, from the top. And then through all this meandering through the 3 cones and the canopy of the landscaping, you arrive at this marketplace, which is almost the entire footprint of the buildable area as a usable space. So here you wind up. But what is actually impactful about this pavilion, because of the full coverage of this sort of the footprint of the building as PV panels, we are able to create a zero energy, zero water, and zero waste pavilion. Water is desalinated using the solar panels, energy from the solar panels, and complete recycling of the waste. Any food waste is going to be composted. Any other waste will be recycled, including the final disassembly of this pavilion. But what is noteworthy is the fact that we wanted to see the ecosystems services of this pavilion, if it's scaled up, will make an impact in the semi-desert and desert areas. So we are comparing against Dubai's natural sandy vegetation, and then with a typical local bungalow, which is about the same size as this pavilion, comparing the Singapore pavilion, and then scaling up to district level. So you can see the ecosystem services that the pavilion provides. It helps to purify air. So if you see these indexes here, you see that as a basis, Dubai's natural sandy vegetation is always 100%. And then next to it is the local bungalow, how it performs, and then our Singapore pavilion, how it performs, and finally, when it's scaled up into a district like the Palm Jumeirah, which is full of these local bungalows, what sort of impact it will have. So you can see the scores that we are doing very well. So we exceed the ecosystem services of what a Dubai natural sandy vegetation would do. An amount of oxygen too is almost twice of that. Water runoff is almost equal to that. Visual screening, of course, is better. And solar heat reduction too, we are doing much better, almost twice. And the carbon dioxide sequestered is almost 700% of the Dubai's natural sandy vegetation. And then, of course, noise screening, because of vegetation, it also helps a lot. The reason why when it's scaled up is less, we started taking into account some of the precinct services like roads and M&E services. So the rating starts to go down a little bit, but not too much. So we wanted to also explain, if we actually move this pavilion even to a further extent, what it can possibly do. There's a possibility that it will actually reverse desertification. There is science in it that with sort of reintroducing of vegetation, it's possible to increase rainfall by 30%. And this is a bit of a summary of the good things at the regenerative scale that any cities, any countries should consider. I will not run through all of them, but some of the things that I think will be meaningful to discuss later is the densification by 3-dimensional planning. Half Earth is something that I'm quite interested in which we started calling some of our cities and master plan 50-50 cities, in which we do think it's important for us to reserve and allocate 50% of land to be rewilded, to be for nature, so that the planet can regenerate. Some of these other things could be considered are sort of integrated landscaping, sort of move towards plant and lab-based food, permaculture landscaping. So these are some of the good practices I think the world can actually go into. This is a summary of all of them, and that if it's sort of pushed actively, hopefully the world, or rather not the world, the human species will at least have a fighting chance in 2050. I think the report by the UN, latest report, is not very good. Man is responsible for what we are going through, the existential crisis, and that if we don't act up now, it will only get worse. But if we do the right things and push the agenda, hopefully by 2050, there is still a fighting chance for the human race. This next project is something that I've never shown before. It's our entry for the Founders Memorial in Singapore, and it was a scale-up version of the Singapore Pavilion. I wanted to show this primarily because it demonstrates how, if you look at something small, you know, you can actually think of it as a scale-up project. So this one is about almost 10 to 20 times the scale of the Singapore Pavilion. At the same time, we have been able to achieve zero energy with this building, and water is not an issue in Singapore. So I'll just run through quickly just to show you what it can possibly look like if the pavilion has been scaled up. The roof is entirely dedicated to solar panels. And if we think about what is the best form and the most efficient form of clean energy for the tropics and the desert area, is certainly solar panels. And for the tropics, it needs to be on the roof because it's the most effective way. So that actually does inform your form, and it does inform how you would do three-dimensional planning. The top layer should always be reserved for producing clean energy. So as a section, you can see it's quite similar. There are a lot of gallery spaces and community use spaces within this facility. And of course, the amount of greenery here exceeds the Singapore Pavilion. The amount of ecosystem services that it actually would provide also does very well. Both on the inside and outside, we also have landscaping. And the landscaping starts to frame views. And even the roof can have event spaces that really takes in the beauty of the city. And the whole memorial was a little symbol of Singapore as a little red dot. This is another scaling up of our typology. I mentioned about our cheese building, SOTA. This is the scale up version. This is scale up to almost 2.5 times the floor area. But in terms of capacity for the students, SOTA was really a building designed for 1,200 students. But in this Brown University in Dhaka, it's actually scaled up to house 12,000 students, but over 2.5 times in terms of floor area. So in terms of scale and in terms of per meter square for different cities, it varies. Singapore is fairly generous, but I think in a sort of a highly populated city like Dhaka, space standards are not as generous. But here, in terms of the ratios, we have been able to do very well. But this is the sort of breakdown of the systems that we were really looking at. We were looking at how we can create effective cross ventilation, creating horizontal breezeways, creating again a lot of social spaces, informal learning and garden spaces for the university, creating a large public space on the ground floor that's dedicated to the community, is open for the community to use, and to top it up, a solar canopy to provide the energy needs for the university. We started off designing for actually a lesser quantum of students. It started off being only 8,000 to 10,000. We were able to achieve the sort of zero energy status for the building, but because they keep pushing the size of the capacity of university, they finally raised it to 12, and with a target of 15,000 students, and the amount of facilities were added, we were not being able to achieve zero energy. So we almost achieved up to about 75% of the energy used through the solar canopy. But it's a combination of passive strategy and sort of innovative mechanical systems being adopted in the building. Most times of the year, we particularly in the winter and in the cooler part of springs and autumn, you don't need any form of cooling. We can actually use the effective breezeway, horizontal breezeway, to cause an effective ventilation to the classrooms. But during the winter, during the summer period, we have come up together with Transolar a system where it is actually a hybrid system where cool air is pumped in using and with elevated wind speed in the classroom, only using 40% of the energy compared to air conditioning. I think this is somewhat also used in SDE building, and this is actually implemented here. So the energy reduction is an important part of achieving zero energy as much as we can, is to reduce the energy used in the buildings. What is also quite fundamental in the approach here is reducing the amount of spaces to be air conditioned. So all the social spaces, all the circulation spaces are not air conditioned. And certainly the ground floor, other than the multipurpose hall and the auditorium, most of the spaces are not air conditioned. So just to look at the plan, this is a site plan. The entire roof is dedicated to recreation. You have a running track, you have a swimming pool, and including a cricket field. But what is actually important about this design is our three-dimensional planning, the layering of different uses, and the club sandwich approach that we've taken. This is what Dhaka is like. It's pretty chaotic, it's bustling, it's very vibrant, and we wanted to create an oasis in sort of a very vibrant and busy destination, to create an oasis of calm, turn the ground floor into a community park for the people. And then at the same time, as in Sota, there is a escalators and staircase that bring people into upper levels and becomes a secure and private academic spaces for the university. So these are some of the courtyard entry spaces that brings people into the campus ground. And as you arrive onto the ground level, it's an oasis of calm. We are using a large a water body, and this water body serves the function of sort of cleansing the rainwater, and also being implemented as a grey water system for the department. And you can see also from below, the solar canopy is almost the full extent of the building footprint. So this is the sort of a community park. We talked to the university, and we do want to encourage them to open it up and to engage the community to allow people to be able to use this space. So in terms of a section, you can see on top, it is the long section across one of the breezeway, how the escalators brings people to some of the important nodes, like the library, like the canteen, like the lecture theaters. And in between them, we also have staircases, and then bringing people all the way to the top where we have the swimming pool and the recreational areas. And below, you can see the subsection. You can see the breezeways being cut perpendicularly. It is actually a true space between buildings. There is enough, we have created pockets in the roof to bring natural light in. So this long covered breezeways are not actually dark. They are actually all naturally lit. And then you can see on the ground floor, it's got very little footprint. It is actually a very porous ground plane to encourage the community to use this park. So these are some of the social spaces in the upper stratum, where it's the private and secure academic areas for the students. And the escalators sort of bringing people up. Because of the number of students here, we needed to depend on escalators rather than lifts. As I mentioned before, my first lecture, lifts are very antisocial spaces. Horizontal movement, escalators is something that we think will engender a better community spirit within the development and for the campus. And the upper stratum is really a bright and airy, breezy, new kind of environment for a inner city, very dense city, yet at the same time creating the right quality of spaces, high amenity for the university. This is a different project again. This is not going to be built, but this is an interesting one because it's all about transport and mobility. I think this is something I think would be good for you as students to look at and to maybe pick up some ideas, because it addresses mobility from fast to slow. This is basically a transportation hub where previously the high-speed rail would terminate here near this facility, and there's also a connection of a few MRT lines and the bus interchange. It will also be the headquarters for the Land Transport Authorities of Singapore. So this is the site. You can see all these MRT lines crisscrossing each other. And you can see the land is fairly underutilized because this was only thought of as a single-use space. But in high-density, land-limited Singapore, we do need to think of multiple uses for any single piece of land. And what is really being used for in this piece of land is our foreign workers sort of using it for their downtime. And that actually gave us a very clue how we should actually turn this space into a useful park for the community. So this is what we call it, the Jurong Park Station. Jurong is where it is, station being a station for transportation, and park is because we wanted to introduce a park into this typology. It has all these important uses all around it, from hospitals to public social housing to to offices, business park, connecting to Malaysia, to the CDB of Singapore, the second CDB of Singapore, and factories and other schools, and also Jurong Lake as well. So this is two little diagrams, how the site was seen as only a single use, but because of too many access roads around, we decided that we actually use the development to plunge a road to bypass the site and then start to create a larger park so that actually it will become beneficial to the residents and be sizable to turn into a business, to a community park. So we expanded this by 4.5 times. So this is the site plan where you still can see all this sort of MRT lines coming out from the train station, going in different direction, but yet at the same time, underneath all of this is now a community park. And on the bottom right is also the connection through a new form of a sort of medium mobility to connect the high-speed rail to this facility. So in terms of a party and a diagram, this was how it would work. The lines are existing. We have to build on top of this, leaving this busy MRT tracks running all the time, but we actually erect the Land Transport Authority headquarters. And yet at the same time, free up the ground level from vehicles and turning into a community and civic park. So in the long section, you can see the train lines runs across. We actually have the car parking above, offices, community users, There are a few different stakeholders here. You have LTA, you have National Library, you have PA. So there's again integrated development of many stakeholders. In the basement, we have allocated to be the bus interchange so that there will be a seamless connection between buses, people using PMDs, and then mass rapid transit, and also connecting to the high-speed rail. So this is actually truly a TOD project. So this is a short section. You can see how the existing train lines are and how we actually build on top of it and yet create enough daylight to illuminate the bus waiting, the train concourse areas, and also the bus interchange. So this is a rendering of the bus interchange in the basement. You can actually see the railway tracks above, the MRTs running above, and yet still getting natural light to the basement. And then you can see directly outside of this is the bus interchange. So yet on the upper level, it's a new ground level, which is an oasis of calm. You have another smaller community park on it. It also has a running track around the buildings, and all the buildings contribute towards contribute all this planting all around it, contributing a higher green replacement for this development. So this is a typical section, but cut across on the 8th floor to show you how the running track is embedded in the towers, connecting all these various towers and all these stakeholders together using recreation. So you can see as overall the sort of runway tracks running around, but underneath is now turned into a community park for Jurong. So this is a quote from Jane Jacobs. I think it's quite important, and I think this leads us to discuss more about mobility. So this, what is important for us is how this is really a true transport hub. How this building can send out feelers to connect to all the precincts and to all the various major population nodes within adjacent to this development, and also connecting Malaysia and also connecting to our central business district area. And I'll show you how we did it. So we realized that between Singapore's Vision's second CBD area and CBD1, we have what we call sort of the railway corridor. All we need to do is actually to connect to it. And also at the same time, there's an elevated MRT station that runs all the way from Jurong to the CDB area. And then it actually joins up with the railway corridor and also another green spine within the city itself. So we wanted to make all this connection all the way to the south and also connecting to the Jurong neighborhood as well. So this is what we created, all these fillers that are actually for pedestrians and personal mobility devices, people using scooters, people using bicycles, and yet safe walkways for pedestrians, connecting people to the various neighborhoods. What is really quite nice about Jurong at the moment, there's what they call the Jaywalk, where it actually connects all the buildings together. This is connecting to that network and creating a bigger network for pedestrians. But now we decided that we actually would bring in the medium mobility, where bicycles, scooters can actually be accommodated and sort of design viaducts for this mobility. I think we catered too much about for catering for fast mobility and for cars, but we haven't done enough for pedestrians and for PMDs. And I think this was one exercise that we thought maybe that it's possible for us to consider building for it. And as you can see, the roof structure over this mobility devices and fillers are always covered with PV panels, increasing the surface area where we can actually have solar panels to create more energy, clean energy for development for the city. So, so on the left, you can see is an existing MRT. Using existing structure, we are able to create a new deck level that will have bicycle paths and pedestrian paths, and also create a linear park by having planters along the way to provide shade and shelter through the PV panels, and also a biophilic quality sort of next to the mobility fillers. On the right side is also a just dedicated to bicycles and pedestrians. It is actually an overhead connection that links up various buildings, and that you can actually join up as many buildings as possible. So it will connect as a network. And then there are also how it actually works together with the ground level, where the ground level is also turned into a park. And then also with the new J line, and also with the fast train coming in, all this will start to connect the entire district and the entire second CDB of Singapore. So in terms of the plan, this was what we wanted to do. We wanted to create nodes that were sort of mobility kiosks, where you can have shared bicycles, you could have a bicycle repair kiosk. It will also be a little stop for cyclists. It could also have sort of storage facilities, delivery facilities, all incorporated into it. And yet at the same time, it is actually a mobility device that is separating vehicles from slow to medium mobility. One thing we were quite adamant was to be able to provide universal access. So it's actually provided for by using lifts to bring people onto this sort of mobility device. So you can see how the undercroft space of the MRT now is to turn into a very park-like quality, where it also does a lot of sort of ecosystems services for the city. So this was the connection to the high-speed rail. It was a little short sort of a monorail system, and yet at the same time plugging onto the bigger network of the pedestrian and cycling network. And this is an aerial view of it, how all this fillers starts to sort of branch out from this sort of a transport hub and connecting the various neighborhoods and buildings. And then when it comes to the existing neighborhood, a series of covered walkways, and reimagining and how the landscape can turn into a more like a park-like ambience, and start to reduce the amount of car parking and roads we have in our existing urban fabric. Some of these are actually implemented in Tampines when we did an exercise, which is part of the exercise we did with NUS and with the Minister Heng Swee Keat. Some of these little things are implemented, but not on a big scale. Okay, another different kind of transport hub. Here you see is actually for Singapore's Munday Resort. Currently is under construction. This was a proposal that we did. We were not selected. I think again, as most of our projects are always overly ambitious, I think most clients and developers tends to get frightened. But nevertheless, it does inform us how we can push the design agendas. When we do win it, we will implement as much as possible. But we do like to reach for the stars and do as much as we can. So when you start to cut it back, it still achieves a very high quality of our vision. Here, it was about bringing a new form of mobility, the fast mobility, MRTs, right into the doorstep of the Singapore Munda Resort. Here you can see below is the MRT and also the car parking and the buses. But on the ground level, again, is a tranquil of calm. It's a park, but it's actually your arrival. It has many of the sort of Munday Resort amenities, the sort of reception, some of the administration, some of the front of house of the hotels, and some of the front of house to the various parks within the Munday Resort. But what is important is that above it is a shelter, and it is actually a land bridge that allows animals to move freely away from people. So if we look at the Munday area, this is Munday Road. Set in this landscaping is the existing zoo, the night zoo, and in future, the Munday Resort that will incorporate a rainforest park and also the bird park. And this new transport hub would be the main entrance facility to connect all these various parks together. So when we look at a bigger picture of Munday, we realize that Munday Road is now connected by highways. You hardly need this Munday Road anymore. It's lost its purpose. You can actually move around using the expressway, and that we wanted to downgrade this road into and renature this park into a very sensitive and a friendly a road that can be used to bring people here, but friendly for animals to cross at night, at any time. Because one of the biggest problems about Munday Road is the road kills because it's there's sort of fast-moving cars through it. So we suggested removing this road, downgrade it, and turn it into a sort of only a two-way gravel road, and allow the canopy of trees to be planted close to another, so that the canopy can start to bridge each other, so that monkeys could swing from one tree to the other again. And then having the MRT station coming in at the underground, under the Munday Road, and then to end up in the entrance facility. So connecting the various sort of a park within the Munday Resort, we proposed a Munday Mobile, and this is a very friendly, family-friendly mobility device, where it's actually good for wheelchairs, it's actually good for elderly, it's good for groups, and it would actually move within the area in a rather slowish manner, giving priority to people and also animals. So this is a larger extent of the Munday Resort, having the various facilities. And this was the cross-section of our buildings, where we have the MRT below, the bus interchange, lots of car parking, and then this Munday Mobile that connects the entry facility to the various park destination. And this was Munday Road, the existing Munday Road. We reimagine it being renatured and downgraded to allow the tree canopy to start bridging and to allow animals to freely cross it. And this is Munday Link, which actually currently is where you go in to Munday Zoo and the Night Zoo. And we completely rewilded it and have this Munday Mobile, which is the rail being embedded in the landscape, giving people a truly wild and nature experience. This is all the current infrastructure being turned into beautiful streams and lakes and renatured as much as possible. And this was the Munday link that was turned into a gravel path for people. And then you can see the Munday Mobile connecting to the larger entrance pavilion. You don't see it because it's covered with landscaping, but you see all these sun pipes that actually brings natural light into the rendering that I showed you earlier. And then we also did a scheme for the resort, for the hotel, a resort hotel within the development, and we call it the hike because we wanted people to hide from the animals, to be able to be living in the environment, but not being able to intrude into the realm of the nature. This park is basically nature first, people second. So people are going to hide away from the animals and the insects. And basically all the movement will be underground, and they only emerge into the building directly from an underground connection. And even the ground level is actually renatured as much. It sits on pallets, and that even the facade of the building is such that it's preventing animals from seeing what's inside. And you can actually from inside see out, but not disturb the environment. So this is from inside looking out. So it has got screens, and that animals hopefully will not be disturbed by this. Okay, there's one chapter in a book called Self-Sufficient City. And I think this is I mentioned earlier, it's quite important, primarily because currently in our pandemic, due to the supply chains being affected, the topic of self-sufficiency is very important. We always try to think how Singapore is a land-limited country and city, we could be land-limited. One of the most difficult, self-sufficient rather, one of the most difficult thing is how do we create self-sufficiency in terms of clean energy. Due to the lack of land, this is one of the hardest thing to do. To be self-sufficient in water, I think Singapore is going to achieve it very, very soon. In terms of self-sufficient in food, it's not difficult. Singapore's target is to achieve self-sufficiency in food in 2030. But if we scale out industrial food production, we can easily meet the target of self-sufficiency in any time if we are committed to spend the money in it, to create factories for food. But what is important is that we need to start thinking how to create enough horizontal surfaces to turn into PV canopies so that we can actually harvest as much clean energy as possible. So one of the ideas that we had in layering cities in the chapter of the first chapter of our book, Garden City, Mega City, is inverting the skyline. Instead of the usual bar chart that city skyline like in New York, we reversed it. Have a flat top, but have an undulating ground datum that allows the landscape and nature to permeate it. So this was a different, completely rethinking how the city typology can be effected. So you can see as an aerial image, the top is all about enlarging the canopy for solar harvesting. So this was a new town development for 250,000 people. Because it is residential, residential energy usage is less than the other uses. Say if you are 5 to 6 story with reduced energy loads, efficient buildings, less reliance of air conditioning, your footprint of your building should be able to sufficiently give you enough footprint for creating zero energy. But if you're 10 to 12, you almost need to double this footprint. So in this case, this development, this master plan restricted by the airports around it, we had the height control, and it allows us to go to about 10 to 12 stories, which is perfect. And we actually created twice the footprint size as a solar canopy for this entire district, making it zero energy. So you can see these are based on the courtyard breezeways, where the buildings are lifted up as the inverted skyline, the landscape allowed to permeate the buildings, and also at the same time allowing nature to also permeate it. You can see we have enlarged the canopy for the buildings, for the solar canopy, by cantering out from the footprint of building by twice the footprint, so that we can actually create a zero energy new town. So these are the 4 layers as part of our 3-dimensional planning. The lowest level is the transportation and service level. It is actually a basement and true ground. True ground is one that we think should be left for extensive planting of big trees. That's the best form of way of sequestering carbon. Second is the parkland layer, where is a segregated pedestrian-friendly environment and deck, almost an e-deck, connecting you to the MRT trains and the faster mobilities. And then we have the residential and the workplace layer in between, and on top we have the rooftop canopy layer. So as a section, you can see how it works. Ground layer, an undulating terrain that meets the parkland layer, and then the buildings above, whether it's offices or whether it's actually residential, it supports the large solar canopy. And under the solar canopy, with adjustments of the solar canopy, PV spacing, we allow enough light to actually have 1 layer of farms, commercial farms under the solar canopy. So we were able to achieve also 100% self-sufficiency in vegetables for this residents in this new town. So as you can see, how it actually seen from the top, and then the farmland layer. And the ground layer, the community park layer, is for our pedestrians, and also for a new form of district mobility. This is the last project that I'll show you. This is scale up even bigger. This is happening in Singapore, under construction at the moment. It's called Punggol Digital District, that includes Singapore Institute of Technology. We did the master plan of this whole area. There's almost 20 hectares. And while we were not successful in the new town master plan, the Zero New Town master plan, we were commissioned to do this master plan for Punggol. So a lot of the ideas that we thought about in the earlier master plan are being implemented here. So I'll show you more about the implementation and talk through some of these implementation strategies that we have. So this is where Punggol Digital District is located in the northeast part of Singapore. And there is a current population in Punggol that almost amounts to 350,000 people. But there is actually very little work in this area. So putting this business park at the university here provides a lot of work for the residents in this district, and making their commute shorter, and turning it into a 15-minute district. So this was a very good plan, is to implement this business district in this area, and to also put a university in this area. So what you see here in red is a new MRT line. The MRT will arrive into the center of our development. So there are 2 important spines here. One is the extension of the MRT line, the northeast line terminating in the Nelly extension under the first phase of JTC Business Park. And the other one that is also an important spine is the old Punggol Road, or the existing Punggol Road, that will be turned into a heritage trail. It will be expunged, it will be turned into a pedestrian pathway for the residents and for the community. So this is the area view of the master plan. and the business park, incorporating the university, surrounding it in the north, in the south, in the west, and the east is all HDB housing estate. In the middle will be the university and the business park. There's a small pocket of residential, sort of landed residential next to it. It's basically made up of industry and also made up of education and a few reserve sites. So again, like the three-dimensional planning that we had, the lowest level, the ground level, or rather the subterranean level, is actually the vehicle and servicing layer. I'll explain more a little later about it. And then the next layer is a very pedestrian and community-friendly environment. It's the community park layer. We have almost taken out all the roads from 20 hectares and turn it into a pedestrian park-like environment for the users and also for the community at large. And then we have above that, the academic and the office layers. And of course, on the very top, the tropical umbrella, having the solar canopy and also commercial food farms. This is the section across the university and the business park. Here, this is on the left is the landmark building for the university. It housed the university library and the student forum, and also some sort of lab facilities and classrooms. And on the right is the JTC Business Park. It's very connected by the ground level, by the underground connection, and also elevated connection, which we call the collaboration loop. Here you can see the ground level is actually very pedestrian friendly. It's the MRT, which you can see at the lowest level, sort of under the one of the business park buildings, and it arrives in this big public space that we call the Nexus, which is a very large tropical community space, bigger than the one in Kampong Admiralty, bigger than the other ones that we've done. It is able to house something like 3,000 to 5,000 people. And in the long section, you will see the basement is doing the heavy lifting for this master plan and for this new development, this whole area, because it will incorporate the MRT coming in, the future mobility, logistic, and the district services. And yet above ground is a park-like environment and area connection connecting buildings and verandas that will look into a community park. This is the section cutting across the campus boulevard, which connects, is actually the path of the MRT connecting to the development, and it's turned into a pedestrian-friendly pedestrian mall. And it brings people to the waterfront. At the end is Coney Island. So I'll just explain how we created a park, a sort of a people-centric car-like district. So in terms of a strategy, instead of your traditional city block, where you have all this network of roads, we went for a city block, where we only utilize the existing plan network, and the internal roads are turned into pedestrian walkways, and the connections that we need in the between buildings and entrances, drop-offs are actually brought into the underground and connected between buildings, thereby freeing up the entire area as a pedestrian-friendly environment. So you can see the top is the diagrammatic explanation of it. The bottom, as superimposed, was the original plan, the road plan of the development, and that they all turn into green pedestrian-friendly pathways. So by incorporating the MRT right smack into the master plan, it brings people from all over Singapore into this pedestrian-friendly environment, exiting the MRT directly into Nexus, into a park-like sort of ground plane. Also connected to it is the bus interchange, the extensive connection between all the buildings that's for use for servicing and also for car parking. So the good thing about connecting the car park together is that we are able to reduce the number of car parks and also being able to connect to different buildings so that you can exit to the main roads by different exit points. So this is the sort of is an undulating site. So we can see one area, so the north area is the ground level where we have the Nexus and the bus interchange. And then the connection across to SIT, which is down south, is connecting all the buildings of SIT together. So basically, you don't see any roads on the ground level. They're all embedded in the subterranean. So as I mentioned before, the basement is doing a lot of heavy lifting. We envision this as a underground subterranean structure, primarily because in future, a lot of the vehicles will be autonomous. You don't need people to drive them. You can actually drop off and then they find its way to park their cars or they move out. We have the same goes for buses as well. So in fact, we think that a lot of the energy usage can be reduced further in future when all these autonomous vehicles start plying the basement. We of course have the MRT coming directly into the development, but the main sort of services is sort of accommodating in the basement are the district services. We have district cooling, we have pneumatic conveying system, we have a smart grid, all the connections are made underground. We have a centralized logistic hub where from all the ports, they'll bring to this area and then be transferred into drones to be delivered to all the addresses in the development. It will be an autonomous vehicle hub. So some of the parking spaces for autonomous vehicles will be parking here. And also it connects to the MRT, the transportation nodes. There are also other facilities like sort of substations and M&E services and facilities that are actually embedded in the basement. So sort of freeing up the ground level, you don't have any more substations, they are all underground. So this is one of the renderings showing the MRT entrances connecting to the Nexus, very direct connection, but also multiple uses again. All the staircases turning into event spaces and social spaces. This is a community-centric district, and I'll tell you why. We studied the whole network of Singapore again. What is the pedestrian-friendly and bicycle-friendly network? We have the rail corridor, we have the Round Island route, and we have the Kallang corridor, and we have extensive sort of PCN, all connecting around the four corners of Singapore. And we actually thought we can actually have a new one. We call it the Punggol line. This Punggol line is going to be sort of a pedestrian and bicycle-friendly line that will connect PDD to the Kallang corridor. And why it's important is because it caters to a very large community. As I mentioned to you, Punggol itself has already got a residential population of 350 people. Sengkang has another 300,000, and then Hougang and down south. So we almost connect 1 to 2 million people within Singapore. And if we can create a cycling path, you could actually provide an alternative mobility system and network for Singapore and relieve people from driving cars, using cars, and also to supplement the mass rapid transport system. So you can see this is a calculation of the population that we were able to service using this Punggol line. And this is currently what is happening under the MRT tracks, which we wanted to convince the government to turn it into a bicycle-friendly bicycle path that will connect people all the way to the Kallang corridor, turning into a linear park and connecting the community. And when we needed to go overhead, it becomes land bridges and also sort of commercial, sort of a linear, overhead bridges where you can actually have people plying it. You have bicycles, you have people, pedestrians, but you could also activate it having kiosks and some sort of a convenience stores. So the other aspects of it being a community-centric development is the Punggol line, bringing people to the campus boulevard and then to the waterfront, and then intersecting with the heritage trail. So these pathways are curated with sort of important nodes that will activate all the spines. We have the community park, we have the SIT forum, the nexus, the promenade plaza, and then the boulevard plaza. So you can see this were the two paths in the master plan. This is actually phase 1. This is currently under construction. We are also building all the buildings except for the plot 2 of SIT, but the rest of it is actually executed by us. So you can see there are major nodes, social enablers to activate this spine. You have the boulevard plaza, which is the entrance to the lower ground. We have located the hawker center, which is an important, affordable food facility, amenity for the residents and the community here. The bus interchange connecting to a community center and directly to the MRT and the nexus, and also connecting to the forum of SIT. And then towards the waterfront, you have retail F&B, a market village, and the promenade plaza. And all this whole area, some 10 hectares, is very pedestrian friendly, and we have been able to create almost 3 hectares of park-like conserved forests within this master plan. So we curated all this kind of activities from outdoor sitting areas to ORAs, collaboration, collusion, we call it. You know, we have encounters with art using the land bridge as an art platform. We have areas where we could bring in food trucks. We have temporary storage, temporary stalls and food kiosks, and even passive recreational areas, exhibition showcase areas, and also brainstorming areas for both the university and the industry. So these are some of the renderings and the images of the campus boulevard, starting with the Boulevard Plaza. Is a pedestrian-friendly mall. It's also the vibrant spine. Adjacent to this will be childcare center and playgrounds. The hawker center that I mentioned about. And then covered plaza spaces that are next to the community center, the PA Association Community Center, where events can take place. And above then is a bit of a convention facility for the business park. And seeing this collaboration loop, connecting all the buildings in phase 1 together. And actually you can see an enlarged solar canopy covering the connection between SIT and the business park, connecting 2 large nodes, the forum and the nexus, which will have congregation of almost a few thousand people at any one time. So this is the nexus. It's a multi-purpose, multi-use tropical community space. It is not air-conditioned, it's naturally ventilated. All the simulations were done. We'll show you later how this is actually a sort of a very porous space, allows breezes, cross-ventilation, and when there's no breezes, we actually have big, sort of all these giant, low voltage, high volume ceiling fans to move air around. And this is basically a multi-purpose space that on top of the MRT, hoping that this could be a bit of an outdoor exhibition space, performance space, also a commercial space as well. And then adjacent to that, connecting to that, actually before I go back to the other one, you can actually see on the top right is connecting across to SIT. And the next space that I show you is the SIT forum. So SIT will be connected directly through all these public spaces into the SIT Forum, which is a amphitheater, and it looks up to the SIT Library. This is the other end of the campus boulevard, is the retail and F&B section of it that brings people to the waterfront. And here we actually have a co-living space where we bring temporary residents into the area. And on the waterfront, there's a park-like setting, a market village, sort of having retail F&B next to the waterfront to activate the waterfront as well. I mean, it's important to think of design, not just from providing physical aspects of it, but curate and think about the real estate and the commercial aspect of it. Because without doing that, it is hard to think how to activate public spaces. So this is the Promenade Plaza, the waterfront, creating multi-purpose spaces for different uses, for performances, for boating, for bicycling, and also for F&B. Okay, the next one that is also important about this development is that it's nature-centric. And because of the heritage trail, and also a large part of it was fairly forested, we decided that we must try and save as much nature as possible. And at the same time, Punggol is a very dense place. It's high density and a high built-up environment with very little parks. Currently, you only have 0.87 hectares, but without what we were doing, it will drop down to 56 hectares per person. And I think the target would still to remain at 0.8, and hence in our development, we actually master plan a large portion of the heritage trail and the community park as a conservation area to conserve the large trees and nature within the master plan. In the original zoning plans, there was no considering given to creating a nature space. So we brought in Rainbow Tricycle and to conceive of what we could possibly think about as a biodiversity network by connecting nature hotspots. And this is what we get as part of it. We have a community park, conservation of large trees, building sensitively, trying not to tear down as much trees as possible. We're keeping almost all the major old trees here, and including creating canopy classrooms to bridge from building to building, giving students and giving the industry a different perspective of nature. And here is the repurposed Punggol Road turned into a heritage trail. It actually cuts, it actually is in the middle of the master plan, but turned into a pedestrian-friendly, park-like environment. So in fact, when you walk this trail, you'll only see basically the forest and glimpses of the buildings. But at the same time, this is a business park. It was envisioned as a vibrant industry and educational facilities. We needed to facilitate another system. And this is about creating vibrancy, creating industry collaboration. And we wanted to sort of enable that through making connections between important buildings and hubs, important nodes. So here you can see these are the first phase developments. They are all the buildings are connected on the 5th level, connecting through the canopy walk. The classrooms are embedded in this canopy walk. It connects to the innovation bridge. Then it connects into what we call the forest veranda, where we have collaboration ports. And between the collaboration ports, there is a bridge that looks out into the park and bridges across the heritage trail. Then it connects to the waterfront parcels and also connecting to the phase, so the plot 2 of SIT, where you have the major administration, the auditoriums, and the major canteen spaces for the university. So the idea was to think of an intermediate level to make this collaboration, and using staircases and escalators to connect the various stories of the buildings, and also to discourage the use of lifts. We have actually very little lifts. We try to have more escalators and staircases, only trying to minimizing the lifts to sort of accommodate fire lifts and servicing. So you can see here is the red loop, and it's the collaboration loop, and how it actually plugs into most of the buildings. And as part of this collaboration loops, we have this interesting nodes, social spaces that is filled with nature and filled of collaboration, sort of ports and nooks and corners. And then into larger atrium spaces, and this is called the Digital Cannon. This is one of the main business park buildings of JTC, and in the middle of it is a central courtyard that is has got a central focus where it's actually being activated using sort of F&B cafes and some other sort of facilities enablers. It's actually quite important to, if you create spaces like that, also to think about how it could be activated. So all the classrooms and also the business park looks into a sort of a community park, a large forested area. It is also a resilient and productive district. And that's because of the last layer. It's the solar canopy layer and also the commercial farm layer. And we have one layer of commercial farms. This is actually currently being studied and implemented. And also on top of that, a PV canopy. This was the simulation that we did to justify our courtyard breezeway typology. The courtyard buildings are lifted off the ground and allow a very porous ground level for people and also for nature, and to create enough cross ventilation and wind flow throughout the master plan. So you can actually see the lower levels has got very good movement of air through the community park terrain. And again, looking at the section across SIT, the collaboration loop, and SIT has in fact itself an educational spine that connects itself at the 5th level and the 10th level through amphitheaters, learning spaces, and study ports. And then connecting between buildings will be the canopy walks, which are filled with study spaces and classrooms. And the ground level, you can see, is actually very porous, but we decided that we must have something to activate it. All the lecture theaters are basically on the ground level, and they are disguised as rocks, but contributing a lot of vibrancy to the ground level as well. And then SIT would connect to JTC. And there's a further scheme too, where SIT and JTC, the business park, exchange spaces, embedding the industry in the educational facilities, and the education side embeds into the business side to have better collaboration between the two major stakeholders. So this again is looking at the top, and then looking at the commercial farm layer as well. That brings me to the end of the PowerPoint presentation.